There are nights when darkness is not merely the absence of light. It is a presence, a silent hunger, an unseen soul crawling through alleyways, hunting the last frail embers of belief. The city lies there, wheezing with the breath of rot. Walls, stained and peeling, neon signs, flickering into silence, street preachers, still calling out though they stopped believing long ago, too afraid to say it out loud. They sing hymns with frayed voices and pray as if God were too far away to hear. No one believes in justice anymore, but everyone repeats the word like an old, worn-out prayer. And on the eastern edge of the city, where an old church slouches beneath a crumbling roof, its cross split in half by the storm, from 10 years past, a man is standing there. Still, on the rooftop, no microphone, no congregation, no robes, nothing in his hands, but a question. "Oh Lord, are you still there?" He waited a long time to ask. Waited until no one else dared to. Waited until villains became statesmen, until priests became merchants, until the righteous were drowned in the flood of silence. And when the silence stretched too long, he stopped pleading. He started contending, or rather confronting. "You are the God of justice, aren't you? Then why do they still live?" Habakkuk. That was his name. Not born for kingship, not of priestly blood, no title, no command. Only one thing of faith, beginning to crack. He didn't stand in the sanctuary. He brought no words from God to the people. He stood before God, bringing the cries of the people to the heavens. Why are you silent while your children are crushed? Why do you let the wicked rise, while the righteous are buried in forgetfulness? He wasn't asking for himself. He was asking for all who've ever looked to the sky and heard no answer. The city, drowning in violence, police guarding nothing but their own power, courts turned to theater, the Bible, gathering dust in churches now reborn as shopping malls. The rich lecture the poor on virtue, killers, broadcast on prime time. And through it all, Habakkuk lifts his face, glaring into the invisible, asking the question humanity has whispered through tears for millennia. Do you still hear us? And heaven remains silent. Silent. Like a fist, clenched, refusing to open. Silent. Like a prophecy, not yet released. Silent. Like a death, still unnamed. Habakkuk stands there, a watchman with no weapons left. But still his heart burns, burns with sacred anger, with the wounds of his people, with a faith melting like wax in fire. He doesn't need an answer today, but he will not leave until God speaks. And if you've ever asked, why does evil win? Why do the good always fall? Why is heaven silent when we need a voice the most? Or, then maybe, you too are standing with him on that broken rooftop, in the dark, waiting for something, or more truly waiting for someone. The story begins in darkness, but it never ends there. Habakkuk never left the watchtower. He had no weapons, no bread, no water, only a pair of eyes wide open toward a horizon fading into ash. He did not stand to watch for enemies. He stood to see if God still speaks. They used to say, when God is silent, it means he's preparing something. But for Habakkuk, the silence felt more like a grave, a place where he buried his faith. Day by day, the wind passed through a broken roof. Dead leaves fell from a dried-out fig tree in the churchyard. Children in the slums fought over a crust of bread. A mother held her lifeless child. No coin left for medicine. And he, the soul keeper of a people, heard nothing but his own heavy breathing. Until one night, in a dream not of the eyes but of the marrow, Habakkuk saw a sentence cut through the dark. "Look among the nations and be amazed, for I am doing something that you would not believe, even if it were told to you." He jolted awake, cold sweat soaking his back. His eyes swept the sky as if the words still echoed from the rooftop. God had answered. At last. God had spoken. But before he could rejoice, the next line fell like a blade across his soul. "I will raise up the Chaldeans, a fierce and ruthless people, who will devour lands not their own." He held his breath. The Chaldeans, Babylon. No, it couldn't be. It couldn't be them. Habakkuk had begged God to punish the wicked of Judah, the corrupt officials, the oppressors, the hypocrites in priestly robes. But he had not asked for a horde 10 times more evil to be the hand of justice. Babylon. They were beasts in human skin, merciless, unforgiving. They didn't just conquer cities, they devoured souls. Habakkuk pictured it. The altar toppled in a pool of blood and dust, children torn from their mothers, ancient hymns crushed beneath foreign boots. Surely God wouldn't use a monster to judge a nation already bleeding. He looked up, but the heavens were silent. This time, not the silence of absence, but the silence after a verdict has been read. Habakkuk laughed. Dry, bitter. Not from joy, but from grief. God wasn't silent anymore. He had spoken. And the answer was heavier than the question. Habakkuk sank to the ground, his back against a scorched crucifix, his head bowed low. The city still breathed, still fed, still killed, still sold the sacred. No one knew God had spoken. No one saw that wrath had begun its march. But Habakkuk knew, and he felt his blood run cold. Perhaps God was just, but would that justice be enough to shelter those who still believed? When Babylon came like a flood, and if God chose to use evil to correct his own people, then where was the line between punishment and betrayal? Habakkuk had no answer. Only one thing left to do. He rose, climbed the tower once more, and said, "I will stand at my watch. I will station myself on the rampart. I will look to see what he will say to me, and how I will respond when corrected." For Habakkuk understood something. Faith is not agreement. It is endurance. It is holding on to him, even when he does what we cannot understand. And so, he stood in the dark as the city neared its fall into hell. A watchman, a man who dared to contend with heaven, a soul willing to burn just to keep the last flicker of light alive. Habakkuk stood in the wind, like a rotting pillar that refused to fall, beneath his feet. The city kept living as if God had never spoken a warning. The red lights still blinked at the intersection. Troops still patrolled in iron-eyed silence. The elites lounged in mansions wrapped in electric fences, unaware that angels had already knocked on heaven's highest gates. But he had heard it. He had heard God's voice in the dream, and his soul still trembled. Babylon is coming. Like a tidal wave that can't smell blood, it just swallows everything. Habakkuk leaned on broken brick. His eyes searched the twilight, where blood-red light spilled across the temple roof. God is just. But this justice was nothing like what he once preached. And so, he asked again one last time, "Are you not from everlasting? O Lord, you are holy. You cannot look upon evil. So why do you remain silent when the wicked devour those more righteous than themselves?" Habakkuk had accepted Judah's rot, but he could not accept that God would call Babylon a tool. Because if his justice could wear the hands of a murderer, then who would dare stand upright without trembling? God told him the righteous shall live by faith. But how do you have faith in a story where evil takes center stage? Habakkuk sank to his knees, not from exhaustion, but from the crushing truth that justice could be this vast, this high, this terrifying. He saw Babylon in a vision, a grinding machine, faceless, heartless, only claws, swords, and laughter that had no soul. They lived for war, worshipped violence like a god. They needed no reason, only the scent of ash and the sound of human weeping. Habakkuk said, "They cast their nets and drag up all like fish. They kill, then offer sacrifices to their nets, because through them they grow rich." He shuddered, not from fear of them, but from the fear that God would allow it. Is this the new face of justice, not clad in shining armor, not riding white clouds, but cloaked in ash, coming from the north, its hooves pounding into the hearts of men? Habakkuk lifted his eyes to heaven and said what no one else dared to say. "Will you stay silent forever? Will the net go on pulling without end? Will you let them destroy nations without a shred of mercy?" No reply, only wind across the stone wall, but he did not walk away. Habakkuk stood up. His heart still beat, his hand still trembled, but his mouth spoke. "I will take my stand on the watchtower. I will wait to see what you will say to me and how I will answer when you rebuke me. Because sometimes faith is not understanding. It is standing before heaven and refusing to bow. Even if God punishes, even if Babylon comes, even if all things fall apart, Habakkuk still chooses to stand. On his crumbling tower, on the thin line between hope and despair, waiting and believing. Habakkuk stood still like a statue, long acquainted with storms. No more questions, no need for comfort, only this the truth. And the truth arrived, not through thunder, not through lightning, but through a single line, sharp, short, and clean as a blade slicing illusion from bone. Write the vision, engrave it on tablets, so that whoever reads it may run with it. Habakkuk held his breath, not out of shock, but understanding. This word was not meant to console. It was a decree, a message that would outrun the blood. The vision waits for its appointed time. It will come. It will not delay. Habakkuk shuddered. God was speaking of time, the moment when darkness no longer hides, when evil no longer wears a mask, when justice comes not through sermons, but through fire. And then a sentence that split history in two. The arrogant will fall, but the righteous will live by faith. No longer did he stand between questions. He now stood between destinies. On one side, those who built empires with fingernails dipped in blood. On the other, those who had nothing left, but a trembling faith that refused to die. And then, the verdict came, not just for Babylon, but for every empire of shadow that ever dared to rise. Woe to those who gain wealth through injustice. Woe to those who build homes with human blood. Woe to those who drug others to strip them of dignity. Woe to those who bow to gods their hands have made. Each woe struck the ground like a funeral bell, a tolling dirge for the rising empire, and every power that laughs while crushing truth. Babylon will fall, not because Judah is stronger, not because the holy are more worthy, but because anything built on blood will drown in blood. For the earth will be filled with the knowledge of the glory of the Lord, as the waters cover the sea. This was no longer just about one nation, no longer a warning for Judah alone. It was a declaration of war against every system that strangles justice in its sleep. Habakkuk fell into silence, not from fear, but awe. God was not out of control. God was not weak. God had not been silent because he forgot. He was waiting for the appointed hour, and now the hour had struck. Habakkuk exhaled, not in relief, but with the weight of one who had seen the end of days and knew he would live long enough to witness it. He looked around. The city still slept. Faint lights, hands picking the pockets of justice, churches filled with hollow praise. No one knew the blade was already swinging above their heads. But he knew, and he had heard. Habakkuk closed his eyes. And within him, something stirred, not fear, not rage, but resolve. If this world must collapse, he would not run, not hide, not bow. He would live by faith, even if the ground cracked beneath his feet, even if blood reached his doorstep, even if they called him mad. He would live, not because he understood, but because he knew who steers the wheel of destiny. And if Babylon must fall for God's glory to rise, then he would stand in the ashes and praise with the last scream left in his lungs. Habakkuk descended the watchtower at dawn. The first light brought no warmth. It cut like a blade slicing the streets, shining into homes still asleep in the dreams where God no longer lived. His steps were heavy, not from fatigue but from knowing he was carrying a word no one wanted to hear. He passed through the market. People bartered as if tomorrow stretched on forever. Rotten fish were salted to smell fresh. Stained cloth dyed crimson to look clean. Sellers shouted. Buyers laughed. No one saw that the sky above them had been torn open. Habakkuk paused before the temple. The bronze gates remained closed. Incense still curled into the air. The priests recited their offerings, but their eyes were hollow, as if speaking to stone instead of the living God. He stepped forward. A young priest blocked his way, voice flat. "Who are you?" Habakkuk did not answer, because soon the question would mean nothing. To his eyes, the eternal flame inside the temple was already flickering. He walked to the center court, stood among those who did not know they were about to be judged, and spoke. "The Lord has spoken." No one looked up. A few chuckled. One murmured, "Another prophet." A woman selling oil shook her head. There's always someone shouting the end. The temple guard tapped his staff, motioning for Habakkuk to leave. But he did not move. He spoke again. I saw him, eyes like fire, hands hiding thunder. He walked across the earth, and it trembled. A stillness, then laughter. Not joy, but the laughter of those hardened to every warning. Habakkuk scanned the faces, not strangers, neighbors, old friends, people who had once prayed beside him in their youth. But today, they could not hear, would not hear. He said, one last time, Babylon will come, not because they are mighty, but because they are the hand God will use to strike you down. And when the gates fall, don't ask why. Then silence. No one replied. A few turned away. The rest resumed their lives. The priest poured wine. The oil vendor called out her price. A child giggled, chasing a thin cat across the temple steps. Habakkuk walked out. Above the roof, a flock of black birds tore across the sky like ink spilled on white parchment. He knew this nation had chosen silence. They were not blind. They simply closed their eyes. Not deaf, just unwilling to listen. And the most terrifying thing was not Babylon, but that the human heart had hardened so far God had to use Babylon to make it feel again. Habakkuk stood in the street. No one looked. No one waved. He was a shadow of a faith forgotten. But inside him, a quiet fire burned. He knew the hour had struck. No more warnings. No second chances. History would not shift. Babylon would come. The city would fall. The temple would burn. Those who laughed today would weep. Those who would not hear would be dragged away in chains. Heads bowed, not knowing north from south. And he, the one who heard God, would survive, not because he was strong, but because he had listened and believed. Habakkuk didn't need them to believe him. God's word doesn't need applause. It is fire. Those who believe, live. Those who don't, will burn in the ashes of their indifference. He turned, did not look back. He walked toward the wilderness, where he would raise an altar of stone, no temple, no rituals, just God alone, and a faith that nothing could move. No trumpets sounded, no decree from the palace, no thunder from the heavens. Babylon did not come like a storm. They came like a plague, silent, certain, unstoppable. By the time the city realized it was too late, from the north, golden dust veiled the horizon. Horses struck the ground like war drums. Chariot wheels ground the roads into powder. The gates did not fall from battle, but from a whisper long ignored. Habakkuk stood on the hillside, watching from afar. Flames had begun to rise, but not from the enemy. The Judah heights burned their own. They burned the storehouses, the temple, the sacred scrolls, even their own names from the map of the Lord. There was no real resistance, only chaos. They trampled each other to flee. They killed one another for an escape that no longer existed. Those who once laughed at Habakkuk now bit their tongues in despair. The priests who anointed with false oil now crawled through bloodied mud, searching for altars long buried. Babylon did not speak much. They didn't need to. They executed with their eyes. They conquered with silence. They ruled through fear that sank into the bones. Habakkuk did not weep, did not scream, did not curse. He had seen this in vision, every detail. But nothing can prepare a man to watch his nation unravel before him. The wind carried the stench of burning flesh, children's cries tangled with battle shouts. An idol shattered and fell, as if heaven itself declared, "I no longer dwell here." And then amid the ashes, Habakkuk saw something he did not expect. A woman held her child, kneeling among the rubble, her eyes closed. Her lips moved. She was praying, not for a miracle, not for escape, but to give thanks that God was still alive, though all else had died. Behind her, a boy tore his garment to wrap his father's body, then bowed and whispered, "God, don't leave us." Habakkuk collapsed, not from fear, but from awe. That faith had survived in ash, in blood, in the clash of sword and boot. He was not the last prophet. He was the witness to the final ember of hope. As the sun sank behind the pillars of smoke, Habakkuk lifted his face, and for the first time in this long unraveling, he sang, not a song of victory, not a funeral dirge, but a hymn of trust. Though the fig tree does not bloom, though the vine bears no fruit, though the fields yield no grain, though the stalls hold no sheep or ox, though all collapses, I will still rejoice in the Lord. I will be glad in the God who saves me. He did not sing loud, but his voice drifted across the battlefield. It reached the ear of a Babylonian soldier, and for a moment, he paused. He did not strike the praying mother. He did not hurl the kneeling boy. He simply walked away. Habakkuk kept singing, because he understood justice may fall like a sword, but glory takes root in a faith that will not die. His nation had fallen, but in the wreckage one voice still sang, one faith still lived, and a God still silent. but never absent. Habakkuk sat still, on the hill overlooking Jerusalem, burning like a final sacrifice. No one offered it. No one received it. Only fire devouring what was sacred and what was profane. He had not run, had not saved, had not stopped anything. He only stood and watched. The night wind whipped his face like a lash. Ash filled the sky, clinging to his robe, his hair, his chest. Habakkuk lifted his face. The sky black, no stars, no moon, like a curtain drawn shut after a tragedy's final act. This is the end, he thought. No more hope, no more temple, no more holy people. Only him and a whisper burning in his bones. The righteous shall live by faith. But to live for what? When there is no one left to save, no land to guard, no future to wait for. Habakkuk had no answer, only the question clinging like an open wound that refused to close. And then he remembered the boy cradling his father, the woman praying among ruins, the soldier who stayed his blade because of a song. Small things, insignificant. They changed nothing. But they were not consumed. And Habakkuk understood. For the first time, he truly understood. Faith is not to win, not to be rewarded, not to escape pain. Faith is what stays alive when everything else has died. It is what still stands when prophecy is fulfilled and hope has turned to ash. It is what makes someone sing in the graveyard of dreams. Habakkuk stood, not for duty, not by command, but because he knew the Lord was still there, not in the temple, but in the hearts of those who still dared to believe, not on Judah's throne, but in every quiet heartbeat within a collapsing world. Habakkuk was not a hero. He was a witness, one who dared to believe in desolation, a lamp no one saw but God did. And so he wrote, not on stone, but into his own flesh. He wrote, I heard, and my heart trembled. My lips quivered at his voice. My bones gave way. I waited in silence for the day of trouble to come upon our enemies. Though the fig tree does not bloom, though the vine bears no fruit, though the fields yield no food, though the stalls are empty, though nothing remains, I will rejoice in the Lord. I will be glad in the God of my salvation. The Lord is my strength. He makes my feet like a deer's and sets me on the heights. When he finished that line, Habakkuk looked toward the city. Only smoke and stone remained. No one remembered his name. No statue bore his face. No temple would ever be built in his honor. And he did not need one, because he understood greatness is not in the outcome, but in believing, even when the outcome never comes. He turned toward the mountains. No one followed. No one called after him. Only one walked with him. A God still silent, but not absent, walking beside a man who dared to love him even when he no longer understood him. Habakkuk vanished from history. No one recorded the day he died. No grave, no stone, only a book 3 chapters thin as the leaves, but sharp as a sacred blade. And within that book, something strange. It wasn't a prophet telling stories to the living. It felt more like he left behind a ritual. No candles, no offerings, only words and faith. The lines he left were not meant to be understood. They were meant to be lived. Are you living in a rotting world? Then read this line. Though the fig tree does not bloom, have you lost everything? Nothing left to hold? Then breathe with this line. Yet I will rejoice in the Lord my God. Do the wicked keep winning? Does justice curl up in a corner and weep? Then stand, even if only in your soul, and remember this line. The righteous shall live by faith. Because this is no longer Habakkuk's story, not Babylon's, not Judah's, not the tale of a temple burning in some forgotten August. This is your story, Mine, ours. Of everyone who has watched the world fracture and still dared to believe that heaven has not gone dark. When you turn on the news and see blood spill for no reason, when every headline is grief and betrayal, when justice is auctioned off like grain, and human hearts freeze like statues in hollow temples, remember. God is not asleep. God has not forgotten. God is not silent out of weakness, but because he is weaving something you wouldn't believe, even if he told you. And maybe, like Habakkuk, you'll never see the outcome. You may die with your question unanswered. You may sing in a room no one enters. You may believe in a world where no one else does. But that is what makes you a citizen of the kingdom of heaven. Not because you are stronger, but because you did not quit. Habakkuk never promised you'd win. He never said it would be okay. He left one line like a red thread woven through generations. The Lord is my strength. He makes my feet like the deer's. He lets me walk upon the high places. So if today you are still standing though your knees are weak, your heart calloused, your tears long gone, know this, you are not alone. Habakkuk stood before you, in the night, on the broken rooftop of a ruined church, and he kept the watch until the moment you were ready to take it. And if you are still here, perhaps your soul has just been touched in the deepest place. At Tales of Black, every story is a ritual, a reminder. There are memories not written in books, but etched into blood and bone. If this story stirred something in you, share it with someone else wandering in the dark. Subscribe so you don't miss the next chapter. And if there's a legend, a memory, or a haunting you long to hear spoken aloud, leave it in the comments. Because perhaps your story will be the next ritual we tell.